Hi there. In this video I'm going to show you how I converted these ruins from the Warhammer 40k Command Edition box set into these custom-made terrain pieces. I've had a list of terrain pieces that I've been making over the last year and a half for games of 40k for myself and my daughter, and these builds were the last thing on that list. I thought that I had saved the easiest project for last, but no, that is not the case at all. These were a lot more complicated to put together than I initially expected them to be, for various reasons that we'll get into. I am pretty new to most of this stuff. I haven't been doing this for very long, and this channel is it's basically just me sort of learning this hobby as I go. So in that regard, if you see anything in this video that you think could have been done better, or some technique that I didn't apply properly, please reach out. Leave a comment or email me. Again, I'm still learning, and if there's one thing that this project has taught me, it's that I've still got a long way to go, so any help would be appreciated. So the first part of this overall project was painting the walls themselves of the pieces that came with the box set. I'm not an authority on painting at all, so I'm not going to go into super crazy detail about how I did this, but I will cover the different techniques and paints or whatever. So yeah, that's a brand new cutting map, by the way. It won't look like that at the end of the video. So, base layer was a primer, Rust-Oleum Grey, fantastic primer. Really recommend that you get it if you need it for large objects. And then it was kind of base coated with just a black spray, and then just dry brushed with, if I can pronounce this properly, I never can, Ulthuan Grey by Citadel Color. Honestly, just even at that point itself, just a dry brush, it looked fantastic. I was really surprised at the results that I got just from a dry brush. They're so detailed, and dry brushing really does help to kind of raise some of that detail. So you start to think about, okay, well, what parts am I going to paint? What parts am I going to leave alone? I do tend to get more paint on my thumb than the models sometimes, but no, whatever. So for some of the detail, some of the pipes were a mixture of Lead Belcher and Abaddon Black. Also some of the other pipes then were, just to give a bit of variation, were Lead Belcher mixed with Rune Lord Brass. I used darkened Mephiston Red for the windows, and then some lightened Mephiston Red for the highlights of the windows. I then started to apply like inks and washes and stuff to the panels, and when dry I applied some more Ulthuan Grey to kind of bring some of that colour back up. I also started applying more washes into the recesses, and in particular I mixed some black ink with Vallejo water texture. I've mentioned Vallejo water texture in the previous video, the bunker build. It's fantastic for like having wet surfaces and stuff like that to like mimic rainwater or whatever, but it can also be used to create a great gloss effect just by mixing paint with the water texture. So I did that to create a wet oil effect, which I applied in a few different places. I knew I wanted to have a mild rust effect. I didn't want to have a really strong rust effect. I didn't want this to look like it was a building that had been in disrepair for a very, an extremely long time. I just wanted something kind of a mild effect, so I didn't use anything like Riser Rust or anything like that. I just used Seraphim Sepia in a few kind of places here and there, just to give the impression that the buildings are beginning to rust. I did try wearing gloves. Turns out it's not for me. Because I'm not an experienced painter, the painting alone took absolutely ages to do. And it was during that I started to kind of have this niggling thought in the back of my head about how I was going to create the rubble for the bases, and how different the rubble might end up looking from the walls themselves. Like specifically, I would need to make sure that the rubble and debris looked as if it came from the building that surrounds it. And if they're different shapes and colours than the walls themselves, then it's not going to seem convincing. You're not going to be able to sell the effect that the rubble actually came from the structure you see. So that's when I realised I should have maybe created the entire base first before painting anything, thereby kind of ensuring that everything could be painted with the same colours and giving some kind of visual continuity, or at least making it easier to achieve. But it was too late at that point. I knew I just kind of had to press on, and whatever challenges I had creating the rubble, I was just going to have to figure out a way of overcoming them. So for the first build, I wanted to do the small ruin first. The ideas behind this were to just kind of keep things fairly simple, just to have a convincing rubble ruin that is crucially playable. I've previously made some ruins before out of different materials, and you couldn't sit models on them, so I wanted to avoid that with this. So the first step was to cut out a base. I have a huge pile of plastic hard, so I just measured out a base for that, cut it out, and then beveled the edges. Beveling the edges of bases works really, really well. It helps kind of blend a model into whatever ground you're sitting the model on once it's finished. After that, I based it with, so I think I used Rust-Oleum first, and then black spray paint on top, and a bit of sand, and then I applied the texture mix on top of that. So the texture mix itself is basically just, what do you call it? Oh yeah, it's just like all-purpose filler. I think Americans call it Mod Podge. Mixed in with quite a lot of PVA. The PVA helps kind of protect the mixture once it's dry. And then lots of black paint to darken it down as much as possible. The all-purpose filler will color it into like a grey, but it makes it easier to paint later on rather than just painting something that's white. And then to that I added lots of sand and kind of little stones, bits of gravel, stuff like that. At this point, I thought about adding a piece of wire mesh. I wanted the floor or the interior of this collapsed structure to look different from the gravel that was on the outside, to make it look like, like there might have been a floor there or something. So yeah, I just took a piece of this wire mesh, stuck it down. So then I moved on to starting to make the rubble. So I started off by making some H-beams or some I-beams. There was a great tutorial on the Cult of Crafting, which is a fantastic YouTube channel. Definitely advise you go check them out because they're really, really good. Yeah, they have this tutorial for how to make these like H-beams. I did mine a little bit differently from how they said to in their video. They said that the best kind of gluing agent that they could come up with was to use PVA. What I ended up doing instead was I would apply super glue to one side and then super glue activator to the other side, and that seemed to work really, really well. Then after that, as per the tutorial, I just applied lots of PVA glue to the exterior. Once that had dried, you're left with a really, really solid H-beam or girder or whatever they're called. So the early ideas of what kind of rubble to use for this, it's another example of how I should have kind of planned all of this better. What I did was I took like little shaped bits of whatever, like sprues and different things that I had, and spray painted them all with the intention then of kind of setting everything into the texture mix before it dried. Oh, and in addition to that, I also had like this collected bag of like weird detritus stuff, like whatever crap you have sitting on your desk after you've built something. I collected all of that stuff, and like a lot of it looks pretty cool because it looks like it could be the interior, like bits of the interior of whatever this building was before it was destroyed. In addition to that, I also used a barricade that I just stole out of my daughter's box of Necromunda, so thank you to her. I also took one of her barrels from, I think it came with one of her editions of the Imperium magazine. It's just a Warhammer barrel thing. Took half of it, stuck it down. It looked like a good place to put one, so, there it goes. There was one technique that I did come up with. It was to make rivets to add rivets onto something. And I've used different techniques in the past to make rivets, but I figured instead of actually having a physical object, it might just be better to just texture something. So what I did was I took some super glue and I took a cocktail stick and I dabbed little bits of super glue onto a piece of plastic card or whatever in little rows, with the intention that whenever you paint over the top of that, any dry brush is going to hit that raised area and look like a rivet. I also made this raised platform. I was kind of really happy with how this turned out, to be honest. Really simple, straightforward. That is just the center part of a sprue that is cut out and just with a piece of wire mesh kind of glued to the top of it. I've kind of deformed the mesh a wee bit just to make it look a bit damaged, and then just painted it up, put a bit of dry brushing on it, and yeah, it turned out okay. So yeah, as I mentioned, I will say that at this stage, I wasn't too happy with how the rubble turned out. It just didn't really look particularly natural. When I came to the third piece, I had finally figured out a way to really kind of turn these around, so thankfully I did end up coming back to this and fixing it. So for the next piece, which was the watchtower, the idea behind this was to have some kind of a platform to join up with the raised floor. I also wanted to have some more detailed rubble. Honestly, I just kind of wanted to do a bit of a better job with the rubble than I had with the first piece. So while I was experimenting with the I-beams that I had made, I kind of like built this sort of wooden plinth thing to try and make some kind of a platform, and it looked absolutely terrible. So I ended up finding a tutorial. I went specifically looking for different kinds of tutorials, and I came across this tutorial by the Cult of Crafting again, on how to make a ramshackle tower. And I took one look at this thing and I was like, oh my god, that looks incredible. I have to make something along these lines. Like, it even used the same kind of I-beams that I had already like built a pile of. So it's like, all right, I'll give this a go. I like, full disclosure, I hadn't originally just intended to copy this guy's design, but that's kind of what ended up happening, which is the reason why I want to give absolute full credit to the Cult of Crafting for the design of this. I'm not about to take somebody else's design and then kind of claim it for my own. This is me just learning how to do all this kind of stuff, and if I'm going to use someone else's design, I'm going to make sure to fully credit them. But what I did kind of say to myself was, right, okay, I'm going to have to kind of make it my own somehow. So when I kind of had the structure made, I was like, this would look really cool if you could have searchlights on it. Obviously not having a clue how to go about making searchlights at all, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized, wait a minute, you could kind of incorporate that into gameplay. Like, there could be a buff to hit rolls or something for anyone that's actually up on the tower. I wanted to incorporate electronics in some form, and I have all this stuff that I bought, like these switches and cables and soldering iron and stuff, and I hadn't used any of it yet. But I was like, all right, look, you know, I need to personalize this tower in some way because it's not my design. This could be a cool way of doing that. So I figured, all right, I'll give it a go. But as for building the tower itself, yeah, I pretty much just followed the guy's tutorial. For the front of the tower, I added a couple of different panels and stuff. I'm not really sure if I got the scale right, to be honest. I think they should have been a bit smaller, but you know, whatever, it serves a purpose. But they're pretty straightforward. The corrugated iron that you see there, that's just corrugated cardboard painted up. One thing that I did do for some of the panels, like there's one at the top there that was supposed to be like a piece of metal sheeting. You can see the rivets idea that I used previously with the super glue technique. One thing I also did was I noticed that if you take like a blunt edge, I think I used like the bottom of a pen or something, and you press it into cardboard, you can get these really cool indentations and stuff. Like, it looks like, you know, a piece of sheet metal that's been like panel beaten or whatever. The only downside was when I painted it, that detail kind of disappeared, but yeah, whatever. So when it came to then actually starting to make the lights, yeah, initially I didn't have a clue what I was doing, wasn't sure how to go about it at all, but I just kind of took it one step at a time, and I had the LEDs. I had heard somewhere that if you put hot glue on the end of an LED, it helps it like glow brighter, and it's true, it really does work. But I wasn't sure what like housing to use for the searchlights themselves, but I've got loads of these like e-cig liquid bottles lying around, and they're probably going to end up featuring in every single build video I do because I've got so many of them, and they do seem to be kind of multi-purpose. So yeah, I was like, okay, that looks like it could be the housing for a light. So we started to assemble that, just put a piece of cardboard inside it with the LED coming through. And I wasn't sure what to use as the bulb on the outside of the housing, but I came across this like little piece of plastic thing that I had in my bits box that when you cut it in half, it was like this convex shape. It fit right on, and yeah, it looks okay. The poles that they're sitting on are just straws with holes drilled in so that the wires can be fed down through. Those little detail bits that you see there, I'm not even really sure what they're supposed to be, but it just looked a bit blank and a bit plain, just having this straw sticking up. So I figured, yeah, I need to have some kind of detail there. So I put these things on, and they're like little clip things that you can hammer into walls to secure like cabling or whatever. It naturally kind of fit the shape of the straw, so I figured I may as well put something there. I wired then everything down into the bottom, the underside of the tower structure, where there's one of these little kind of housing things for a 3-volt battery, and then just a little switch then to turn the lights on and off. And like, again, I've never done any electronics before. I've never wired anything up before. Like, I didn't have a clue what I was doing, but I figured, all right, a lot of the future projects that I do want to do for this channel are going to involve some pretty complex electronics, and I'm gonna have to learn this. So without really knowing what I was doing, I started, soldering stuff together. And yeah, you know what? If anybody that was familiar with soldering could see the work that I did, they would probably cry because it was so bad, but it doesn't matter because it works. It's extremely messy and very, very sloppy. But yeah, you know what? There's a little switch, you can turn it on, the lights come on, and it's extremely derpy, but it's more about me practicing a new skill rather than building something practical. To continue to kind of personalize the tower structure, I thought about building like some kind of like electricity pylon kind of thing, like telegraph pole, whatever. I know that for some of the future projects I want to do, I want to have some much larger power pylon things. And figured, yeah, these are simple shapes, so I should be able to put something together. The pole itself is just a piece of sprue that's been trimmed down. Good tip is to make sure to always aim your blade towards your thumbs so that you get some cool looking scars. The top part of the pylon, that's all just made out of, I think like matchsticks or whatever. The little bits on the top that you see there, those are little cutouts of sprues, and whenever I was cutting out the pole from a piece of sprue, I cut these bits off first, and when I looked at them I was like, yeah, do you know what, they kind of look like they would belong at the top of a pylon, so stuck them there. They're not perfectly uniform or whatever, but they don't need to be, serves a purpose. You can tell what it's supposed to be. The little transformer box thing on the back of the pylon, that is just a couple of bits of foam board with a couple of bits of wire stuck in, and then I took some green stuff, which I think this was the very first time I ever used green stuff, and just made little circular things out of them, discs out of them, and then just kind of attached them. Again, they're not perfectly uniform, but you can tell what it's supposed to be. I think that's probably good enough, I guess. For the cables themselves, the wires, that's fishing wire that I had bought for the previous build that I did, the bunker build, where you can use that to make really convincing looking barbed wire. So I just used some of that here just to make it look like, power cable or whatever. And yeah, I mean, it all kind of came together. The scale isn't quite right. It's probably a bit too small for a 28mm size, but first time putting anything together like that, I think it kind of came out okay. So on the other side of the structure, there is a canopy. I covered this in the previous bunker build, but they're really straightforward. The canopy itself is just a wet wipe that's been allowed to dry, covered in PVA. Once the PVA dries, then it sits rigid, and then it's just painted. The wooden poles that are holding it up are, again, just taken from some old sprues. The ladder that you can see there, I purchased these kids tennis rackets where, like, I saw a tutorial somewhere how you can take old tennis rackets and trim them out to use them as ladders, so that's what I did here, and yeah, looks okay. So for the basing then, I pretty much followed the similar idea from before. Same, application of gravel and sand and dry brushing and then a texture mix, but I used a lot more rubble this time. There was one little piece that I used, this little thing that you can see here, which is the cap from some spray paint. It's like a safety cap thing when you buy a new can of spray paint. Yeah, I figured it might suit as a piece of rubble here, and I guess it looks okay. I also added some posters to the sides, the poles on the sides, or the supports, the girders on the side, and also on the front as well, just to give a little bit of life and a bit of character to it, because it kind of felt a little bit sterile. For the most part, I was pretty happy with the finished product. I was happy with the idea. Like, I was pleased that I had attempted something with electronics and that it had kind of come out successful enough. You can turn it on and it works. It's kind of derpy, but it's a first important step in the right direction if I want to learn electronics, and I had to do this at some point, so... But yeah, that's pretty much it for that build. Alright, so that brings us on to the third piece, which is the campfire. So the idea behind this was to have more electronics. I wanted to have some more detail and some more signs of life. I wanted it to feel lived in, which I think the first two pieces kind of didn't. So we thought about maybe having a campfire. Again, I don't know how to do that, but we'll figure it out. So I made this sofa. Yeah, look, this was the first time I had ever properly tried using green stuff to make anything. And one thing is for certain, I am terrible at using green stuff to make things. I do not understand how people use this to properly sculpt stuff because it was kind of a nightmare, to be honest. But I used a reference photo and I built a basic structure out of cardboard and then applied layers of green stuff on top. What I intended to do was to have some texture to make it look as if it were made of some kind of a cloth material or whatever. But honestly, the only texture that I succeeded in getting onto that sofa were my fingerprints. Yeah. You can tell it's a sofa, which I think that's about the best we can really say about it. But whatever, the results came out okay, I suppose. So for the electronics in this piece, I'd come up with this original idea of taking some of these flickering tea lights that, like, I already have a bunch of these, and I had already worked with these like brass coupling things before during the bunker build video to make barrels out of. And when I was making that, I kind of had this eureka moment that if I sat one of these on top of a flickering tea light, like, it's gonna look like it's got flames in it. And I was like, oh my god, I've got to try that. That's awesome. Then I did since find out that loads of other people have had this idea as well. So I'm not the first person to come up with it, but you know, whatever. But yeah, the idea behind that then was that there would be this barrel sitting next to the sofa. I thought about the idea then of having some pallets that could be stacked next to the sofa with a radio on it or some other signs of life, and then maybe like a pallet that had been broken up and used for firewood or something. I decided against using the pallets that I had made though. By that stage I realised that the amount of space they were taking up was already making that piece potentially like less playable, as there wasn't enough space to like sit miniatures onto. So I figured that I would just keep that as like an open area instead of having pallets taking up space. So I made a radio. It's just a very basic conversion. I took one of the control panel unit things, one of the objective markers from Necromunda, cut the top off of that, and then cut the handle off the side, and then glued it on top to use as like an aerial, and then just painted it up. Came out okay, I think. Once I had decided on what I was going to have in that corner, I had to wire up the barrel, and it was pretty tricky. I worked out the circuit first to make sure everything worked okay, and I kind of had to do soldering in place so that the wires were fixed properly to the walls. It took quite a few attempts to get everything right, but eventually I was able to get everything to function properly, and it works. It does work. There's a little switch just underneath the roof that you can switch and the barrel turns on, and it looks okay. It is a gimmick. Let's get real here. When we're playing a game with this, like, you can't even see it when you turn it on. It's really only visible in very low light. I did add some tinfoil into the barrel to help brighten it up a little with some reflected light, but the wood pieces and the cotton wool that was meant to look like smoke, like, it kind of blocks most of the light from getting out, but you know, who cares? It's just a concept thing and it works, even if it isn't all that practical. The wood that you see in the barrel and also in the fire pit was basically just strips of thin wood, painted up first with Agrax Earthshade, I think, and then painted mostly black, then with light grey highlights followed by tiny specks of white here and there to imitate ash. And it came out great. I was really happy with this paint scheme. You can't really see that kind of small detail on the tabletop, but it's definitely a paint scheme that would really pop on like smaller models or whatever. I did also at one point want to put sandbags on the upper floor, with the effect that they had maybe been damaged or some of them had burst open or whatever. And I'd even gone as far to like craft them out of clay, but once I had them in place I realised that they kind of drew your eye away from the camp underneath. There was lots of like cool little details there, and the sandbags were kind of a distraction from those details, so I figured like leaving the upper floor empty just might be the better way to go. So the tripod and the cooking pot. I'll just say up front that out of all the little details in these three pieces, this is easily my favourite detail. I really love how this turned out. I didn't really expect it to come out this well, but I guess the key to it was kind of finding this little piece of plastic in my bits box. It was just like a lid of like a juice bottle or something, and as soon as I saw that I thought, oh my god, that's the perfect shape for like a campfire cooking pot. So I built the tripod itself then out of 3 pieces of straightened wire. I then took a couple of pieces of chain. I just found like a necklace lying around the house that belongs to someone. I just stole it, so, you know, thanks to them. So when it came time to kind of putting this together, I was having the worst time ever because I was trying to initially use hot glue on top and try and have everything kind of fed into this glob of hot glue, and it just didn't work, and it wasn't stable, and it kept moving and falling apart and stuff. So what I ended up realizing was that because all the parts were made of metal, the chains were made of metal, the tripod itself was made of metal, I just soldered it together, and it came out great. It's so sturdy. This finished detail is not actually glued to the base itself. It's removable because we wanted to be able to put miniatures down. Yeah, this thing is like fallen on the floor, I don't know how many times, and it's still going, like it still hasn't broken yet, so it turns out that soldering was probably the way to go there. The cap on the top, it's one of these things that you can, like, I don't know, sew into trousers or something. I found a bag of them lying around the house, so I figured I'd be able to use them for something, and yeah, it works. For inside the pot, I had purchased this set of miniature scale bones for a different project, which I had never materialized, and I figured, yeah, alright, I'll paint some of those up using a paint scheme that I normally use for blood effects, which is like a texture paint, blood for the blood god, a brown ink, and yeah, just kind of painted that up, painted the inside as well. I used some more of the Vallejo water texture just to give it that kind of glossy finish, and it came out really, really well. I was so happy with how this looked. So in addition to that, I made a little frying pan and bowl. The bowl itself is just made out of green stuff, just shaped. Again, don't really know what I'm at, but you know, I figured it would be good to have one extra little detail there. The frying pan as well was, I think that started life as like a Lego frying pan, but it had all these kind of weird knobbly bits on it, so I just kind of dremeled them off, and yeah, you know, it looks alright. I decided then as well to include another barricade from the Necromunda box set. Just painted it up pretty similar to the one from before, but I wanted to add some more gore effects to this. I came across kind of a happy accident when creating the gore effects. As you can see, they're really, really convincing, and that was purely by accident, and it kind of gave me inspiration for what I think my next video is probably going to be, because I've got a lot of ideas of how to make different kinds of gore effects now, so stick around for that video. When it came then to basing this was an interesting process because, as I mentioned before, I wasn't too happy with how the first two pieces came out, but I was really determined to get this one right. So I remembered that I had a tutorial saved called 40k Urban Rubble Bases by the Miniature Men, and it was a tutorial that I had intended to follow a while back but never got around to it, but I had actually already purchased the plaster of Paris for it. So I thought, okay, do you know what, I'm going to give this a go. I mixed up the plaster of Paris. Crucially, what I added was I added a lot of black paint and ink to try and darken it down as much as possible to save on painting. What I found was that if you get the correct ratio of water to plaster of Paris, if you really nail it, you get it right, you can make it so that the plaster of Paris is very, very, very slightly porous, and it means that putting washes and stuff on top of it afterwards is much, much easier. There was one particular batch I made that was way too hard, and it was extremely difficult to paint. But yeah, it was enough to get this base finished, and it worked enough that I then decided to go back and fix the other two bases. I made up a couple of other batches. It didn't exactly look the same as this campfire batch of rubble, but you know, it doesn't matter. They're individual pieces. It's okay if they're not identical. After that, I based the outside then with some more of the rubble, and then just went round and added some paint, added a few washes here and there, just darkened down some different areas just to kind of give it a little bit of visual contrast. And that was it pretty much finished. And yeah, I was really, really, really happy with how this one came out. Again, enough that I went back and kind of fixed the first two. But yeah, that was that pretty much finished. So that is it for these builds. These definitely did take a lot longer to make than they should have. In all honesty, these should have been 3 separate projects and 3 separate videos. It would have allowed me more time to add more details and to iron out the problems without feeling like I'm constantly rushing myself. That said, I'm definitely happy with how these ended up. These are playable pieces that look great on the tabletop, so yeah, it's all good. I am thinking of making a more detailed video that goes through all of the different terrain pieces that we currently have for our 40k table. Let me know in the comments if that's something that you think would be worthwhile, and I'll put together a video. It won't take months to make, I promise. But as I mentioned earlier, the next video will be a tutorial on how to make different variations of gore effects. So yeah, watch out for that. Just before I sign off, I'd like to thank everyone that gave me such positive feedback from the last video. That honestly was what gave me the patience and determination to get this one finished. So thank you. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please consider doing so. It'll do all that happy YouTube algorithm stuff and hopefully help this channel grow. So for anyone that has had the patience to make it this far into the video, here is the full cinematic trailer featuring these 3 builds. So yeah, enjoy, and see you next time. Bye.